to AM 950, the progressive voice of Minnesota, for another episode of Politics Matters, how civics, politics, and law affect you. I'm your host, Bruce Klopfleisch. Thanks for listening to the show. If you have any comments or you have a question about something that I'm talking about, you can email it to comment@am950radio.com. So if you're new to the show, I usually start off with a civics segment, which is what I'm going to be doing today. But before I do that, I'm going to just do a quick little review for how we got to what I'm going to start covering today. So we've been going through some of the founding documents from the 1770s and 1780s to kind of give you an idea of how the founding fathers kind of set up the government and how they thought the government was supposed to work. And I'll talk a little bit about later shows how it didn't work the way they thought it was going to work. So in previous shows, and you can go back and listen to them if you like, we have talked about the Declaration of Independence, where you start seeing the word United States in a document. Before that time, you didn't really see them calling themselves the United States. And in the Declaration of Independence, they lay out a number of reasons for separating from England and trying to justify to other countries why they were declaring independence so they could get money from them and arms for them to fight against Great Britain. So after they did the Declaration of Independence, they had to form a new government at the national level. So we talked about the Articles of Confederation, where basically that is the government that got us through the Revolutionary War and the aftermath. But the Articles kept too much power with the state governments, which became a problem. So on a previous show, I went through some of those problems, particularly with no taxing power. And they started having problems maintaining order, which is, as I mentioned before, one of the reasons that you have a government is to maintain the order. So basically, the Founding Fathers decided to ditch the Articles of Confederation, and they had a constitutional convention to come up with a replacement for it. And that's something that I covered last week, was a constitutional convention. So they wanted to have a stronger national government, but not too strong because, they recently separated from England. So that was kind of the balancing act that they needed to cover. So we're going to be covering the Constitution today. But I'm just going to give like a general overview of the articles that are in there, just very basic. And then in future shows, I'm going to go into more detail about what they actually say and whether it actually works the way that it's supposed to, and some of the problems that it has arisen under it. So we're going to be spending some time on the Constitution. So basically, the main difference, if you will, from the Articles of Confederation to the Constitution is, under the Articles of Confederation, basically you had the Confederacy of States, and the states still had the power. Well, under the Constitution, they totally changed that to forming a republic, where the people have the ultimate power, but we represent our elected officials to run the government for us or on our behalf. That was one of the big switches between them. So, and with the Constitution, this was like the first time it was done in the world. So they were, the founding fathers, you got to give them credit for going out where no one else had gone before. And this is what they came up with. So the Constitution started with the preamble, which we covered in, again, I mentioned that in an earlier show because it has some of the purposes of the government in there. So the preamble is just one long sentence with a bunch of commas in it. So I'll just go through it here with you again. It says, we the people. Now notice it says people here, whereas under the Articles of Confederation it said states. So this was the big change, one of them here. In order to form a more perfect union, because the union had not been working so well, establish justice, one of the purposes of government, Ensure domestic tranquility. Again, another purpose of government. They were having trouble with this. Provide for the common defense. They needed a national army. That they didn't really have one under the Articles. Promote the general welfare, meaning making life better for the citizens of the United States. And secure the blessings of liberty. So there's, again, one of the purposes of government. To ourselves and our posterity, meaning future generations. Do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. So that's the preamble. Pretty basic things. You probably learned that in elementary school or middle school, perhaps. So from there, the Constitution then moves into 7 articles. So, Brett, did you read the Constitution at any school that you attended?
I definitely did back in high school for my government class my senior year. Definitely remember that from good old Professor Steve Swazinski,
okay, right.
Who's now in the state legislature. Yeah, we definitely went all through the Constitution.
Okay. So there is a lot of people who have no idea what's in the Constitution and haven't been taught that. But if you're in my class, you're going to be reading through it and actually be writing a paper on it too. So I'm going to briefly go through the 7 articles. So the first 3 cover the 3 branches of government. Okay, so Article 1 is the legislative branch, which is Congress. Article 2 is the executive branch, which is the president and the federal agencies that he controls. And the 3rd article is the judicial branch. So this is basically the Supreme Court and the federal judicial system. Article 1 on the legislature is by far the longest article in the document. The founders thought that the legislative branch would have the most power. So you'll see when we go through it later that they put in specific powers in there for Congress to have. They put some powers in there that Congress cannot have. They put some powers in there that the states cannot have. So, I mean, there's all these different sections where they list the powers or non-powers to certain entities under the Constitution. I mentioned last week about how they came up with part of the Great Compromise, where they came up with 2 houses of Congress. So you have the House of Representatives is one, and you have the Senate, which is the other one. Those 2 make up Congress. So Article 1 lays out, there's a section in there about the House. And then there's a separate section in there about the Senate. So that's why Article 1 is the longest one by far. Plus, a lot of the Founding Fathers were in the legislatures in their states. Or some of them were in the legislature under the Articles of Confederation. So they had experience with this sort of stuff. So it was probably a little easier for them when they were writing up the Constitution to do this section rather than some of the other articles, as we'll see, are definitely not as long as this one. So Article 2 then, it's the second longest section, and this deals with the executive branch, and that means basically the president and the executive agencies that are underneath the president since he runs them. It also contains the Electoral College, so this is something that is in place only for presidential elections, and I'll be talking about this later before November. When the election comes up. But this is where the Electoral College is in the Constitution. It also lists the powers and the duties of the president. Now, they are 2 different things. And also contains the section in the Constitution dealing with impeachment is in there. Article 3, then, is on the judicial branch. And this one's pretty short. Basically what they did is they established the Supreme Court. So they actually said that in the first section under Article 3. And then they basically said, well, Congress, you can set up the rest of the court system. They lay out the jurisdiction of the federal court system. Jurisdiction meaning the ability to hear cases. So if a court does not have jurisdiction, they cannot hear your case. So they put in there the jurisdiction of the federal courts, and also some about the Supreme Court is in there. And then the last part defines what treason is. Article 4 then deals with relations among the states. And this one's even longer than Article 3. So one of the problems that the Articles of Confederation has was basically you had 13 different states, and you had 13 different governments, you had 13 different economies. Right, so Article 4 here is an attempt to kind of make it a little easier for the national government to deal with state governments and for states to have their laws and their court decisions recognized by the other states. So that's part of what Article 4 does. And this is, under the first part, it talks about the full faith and credit clause. And that's where the Constitution says that other states have to abide by other states' laws and rights of their citizens and those sorts of things. Now, sometimes there are disagreements, of course, and they end up in court, but that's part of Article 4. Another part of Article 4 is how states get into the Union. So that's an important part. So, we started out with 13, and now we're up to 50, and now there's some arguments being made by the Democrats to add Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. as states. So there's a procedure that you got to go through, and that's in Article 4. And Article 4 also says that if you are a new state and you get admitted, you have to have a republic. You have to follow the government that is already in place. You can't have your own other kind of government. So you got to follow they call it the Republican form of government, but what they mean is a republic. So we all 50 states at this point, we all operate under the same type of government at the national level. State governments, different types of things, but at the federal level, it's the same. Article 5. This is an important one because this is the one that deals with how you amend the Constitution. There's big disagreement on this one over whether the Founding Fathers made it too hard to amend the Constitution. So that's something I'll talk about when I cover Article 5. But that's where it is located in the Constitution. Basically, Congress, 2/3 of Congress, or 2/3 of the state legislatures can propose constitutional amendments. And then three-fourths of the state legislatures, or 3/4 of the state, if you have a national convention, need to ratify those proposals before they become an amendment. So that's pretty hard given today's political environment. Article 6 deals with the Supremacy Clause. I mentioned that last week, where the Supremacy Clause basically says that where there's conflicting state and federal laws, the feds win, the states lose. The feds are supreme. When it comes to the national, like congressional laws and treaties and the U.S. Constitution, they're supreme to state laws that conflict with them. Of course, one of the big issues in those cases are, well, do they really conflict or not? Article number 7, the last one, the shortest one. This one basically says, well, 9 out of the 13 states, through having state conventions, need to ratify the Constitution before it becomes implemented. So you needed 9. That didn't take very long, as it turns out. Eventually, all 13 did ratify it. And if you look at the original Constitution, you'll see that at least the people that were there at the end of the convention signed off on this document. But some people think that, well, they signed off on it and then it was legal. No, 9 out of the 13 states still had to ratify it. So the original Constitution was adopted in 1788 by 11 of the states. So by then it was legal. In June, actually, is when the ninth state adopted it. As it turns out, 3 of the states at their conventions actually adopted it unanimously, which is kind of surprising. Delaware was one, New Jersey was the second one, and Georgia was the third one. Only one state originally defeated it. In other words, said, no, we're not going to do this. And that was North Carolina. But they later had another vote later in 1789 and passed it. 2 states that passed it, it was really close. So when New York passed it, it passed by 3 votes. And when Rhode Island passed it, it passed by 2 votes. So, as I mentioned before, part of the deal to get the Constitution was to do a Bill of Rights proposed by the first Congress in 1789. So these are the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. 2/3 of the first Congress, meaning the House and the Senate, proposed them, and then the states ratified them by December of 1791, when Virginia was the 9th state, and then they became effective. So the Bill of Rights technically is not part of the original Constitution, but it was the first 10 amendments that was added pretty close to it. It was added within 3 years. So during the debates to ratify, both sides wrote newspaper articles to try and convince the delegates to pass it or not pass it. You may have heard of the Federalist Papers. Okay, this is when the people who wanted the Constitution adopted, wrote articles in the newspapers. That was basically the main way they did things back then. So James Madison wrote about 1/3 of them. Alexander Hamilton wrote 2/3 of them, and then John Jay wrote 5 of them. There were 85 total for the Federalist Papers, or the people who are wanting the Constitution passed. Federalist number 10 and Federalist number 51 are 2 of the most famous ones. Those were both written by Madison. Number 10 lays out why we should have a republic. And number 51 deals with the separation of powers and the checks and balances that we have, and why he argues the government should work slowly. On the other hand, the anti-federalists, those are the people who opposed the ratification of the Constitution. They also wrote 85 essays to counteract them. Are the ones written by the Federalists, or in the Federalist Papers. So some of those people were Samuel Adams, Richard Henry Lee, Patrick Henry, George Mason, and Elbridge Gerry. So one thing to note here, even though the Anti-Federalists lost, they didn't stand in the way of the new Constitution taking over. They didn't have an insurrection. Okay? They accepted the loss. But they still got a lot of what they wanted, at least when the Bill of Rights came out. So, too bad that at least the Republican Party these days don't act like the Anti-Federalists did, where they accepted defeat. We'll see what the Republicans do when hopefully the Democrats win in November. You have been listening to Politics Matters with Bruce Klopfleisch. How civics, politics, and law affect you. We'll talk to you again on the other side of this break. Welcome back to AM 950, the progressive voice of Minnesota, for another segment of Politics Matters, how civics, politics, and law affect you. I'm your host, Bruce Klopfleisch. So we just went through the Constitution, as I mentioned before, in basic background detail. Starting next week, I'm going to start going into more detail, so you can have something to look forward to there. So if you've been listening to AM 950 lately, you've probably heard about that the station's going to host a listening party for the September 10th debate. So, Brett, can you fill us in on that a little bit?
Yes, that is coming up on September 10th. That's a Tuesday where Kamala Harris will be properly debating Donald Trump and hopefully putting him in his place. I'm at least hoping that happens. I'm sure you are too, right?
Well, that assumes he shows up.
That's a very, very good point. Yeah, I could see that on. September 5th. I'm getting cold feet. The moderators are going to be unfair to me.
Right.
He'll come up with all sorts of excuses. But if it happens, which we're anticipating it will, September 10th is the date. We're having a watch party over at Crooner's Supper Club off of basically near 65 and 694 in the North Metro area. Doors are going to open at 6 o'clock where you can come in, socialize. Then at 7, our own Matt McNeil is going to be doing a live pre-debate hour that will be airing over the radio, so love to have you out there since we'll have lots of interaction with that. Then the debate itself gets underway at 8 o'clock, where we'll be watching it up on the big screen at Crooners. We'll have all sorts of fun activities like debate-themed bingo. We'll also have some light snacks available and a cash bar, so should be a good time. Love to see you out there for our debate watching party again September 10th, and get those tickets for $25 over at am950radio.com. Again, am950radio.com.
So they just have to go to the station website to get the tickets.
Yep, exactly. It is a ticketed event, so make sure you do get those ahead of time, and then you'll be good to go to watch the debate party and hopefully see the implosion of Donald Trump live before your eyes.
That would be fun to see.
I just don't know if he's going to be able to keep his composure. He certainly hasn't over the past few weeks. So
yeah, and I think Harris probably knows some of the ways to get him,
Oh, yeah. Being a prosecutor, she'll know how to get under his skin.
Oh, yeah. Well, and I don't think it's that hard, really, to get under his skin. If you've been listening to him lately.
It's a very thin skin, so that helps, too.
That's right. So, Brett, I don't know if you heard, but the Democrats just had their national convention. Were you able to watch much of that?
I was able to watch in and out enough to get some good speeches on that I really enjoyed watching. Raphael Warnock, I thought, gave a great speech. What was that, Tuesday night, I think? Certainly Michelle Obama and Barack Obama gave a great speech. Same with Bill Clinton, was impressed with him. Even the NBA coach, Steve Kerr, I kind of liked his little smackdown he did of Donald Trump as well towards the end of his. So I thought it was overall a very successful speech, or a very successful convention. And obviously I watched Kamala's as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I missed some of them. I had some work stuff that I had to do. So I missed Warnock. But I heard it was, a really good speech. And I would expect nothing less from him. I mean, he's a good orator. So, like, let's say you had to pick, like, your top couple speeches, what do you think they would have been from what you've seen?
And I forgot to mention, just as you were talking before, Tim Walz, got to put his speech in there. But in terms of the top ones, I might have to go with Kamala's as number one, just because I think that was just an effective speech to introduce herself to everyone and come off as, I think, which is important when you run against someone like Donald Trump, to come off as being very strong. And I think she did project a lot of strength. So I'd probably put that as my very obvious number one. But the other ones I enjoyed watching too, Raphael Warnock, I would probably put him at number two. I'd probably call it a tie for third between Barack and Michelle. And if I had to go for fifth place, I'd give that to Tim Walz.
Okay. Well, from what I was able to see, at least, I got to see a good chunk of it. But I've been watching these conventions for a long time. I'm probably going to date myself a little bit here, but probably since the 1980s. That's when I first started watching them. Not the whole things, but at least certain parts of it, at least. I think this is the best one that I've seen, top to bottom. There were some speeches that I listened to, like, I didn't expect a whole lot from them, or they were kind of short, but I thought, pretty much everybody that went up there and gave a speech did a pretty good job. Especially when, if you're comparing these to the speakers at the RNC, oh my God, there's just no difference. I mean, it's, if you did a comparison, it would be, the Democrats definitely did a much better job, I think, in their convention. So it was pretty impressive, I thought. My one criticism, I always got to have one at least, was going too late at night the first few nights. Like Biden, I think going on late during that, that initial debate where he did pretty bad at it. And I was thinking to myself, oh, man, I hope he doesn't start doing that during his speech. But he didn't. I mean, he got lost a few times, I think, when he was reading the teleprompter. But overall, I think he did a great job. So that would be just my one criticism was it went kind of long during the night sometimes. Like, you could start a little sooner, or not give people so much time. But I was glad Biden got the time that he did get because I think what he did was giving up power is must have been really tough for him to do, and letting him have his piece that night I think was a good idea. So I did take a look at the ratings between the RNC versus the DNC, and the DNC every night. They haven't. I don't think by the time I'm taping this, they hadn't come out with the last night ratings yet. But the first three nights, the Democrats crushed the Republicans each night. And I think this is really getting under Trump's skin. He's rage tweeting, all night long, and during the middle of the night. He's calling into Fox News lately, just rambling about stuff again, like he normally does during his press conferences. He's just trying to get any kind of press he can get, and when he starts doing stuff like that, this is really getting under his skin. So I liked a lot of the presentators that the way they had it, where certain presenters would talk about certain topics. Like they had a section on, they had some people talk about gun control, then they had some people talk about climate change issues, the border, unions, all kinds of different things, reproductive rights, those sorts of things. So I like how they had it, the format was where they would have, a couple, three speakers on a certain topic and then move on to a different one. I like how they brought in some celebrities and influencers. I think this really helped appeal to younger voters. And which I think is an important thing, because when you look at polling or voting data, the young voters are the ones that typically vote at the lowest turnout rate. So getting celebrities and influencers involved, I think, will certainly help get more young people out there to actually vote. This is where you can get a lot more, votes than, the polls are indicating and stuff like that. So this will help with more turnout, I think. So I'm just going to kind of go through and just give a little bit of some of my who I caught on each particular night, who I thought did a pretty good job. First night was AOC. Jamie Raskin and Jasmine Crockett, I think, were pretty good ones. One of the reasons why is that they did a good job, I thought, at trolling the Republicans. Now I'm going to talk, probably during Matt's show, a little bit about, I think the Democrats need to start trolling the Republicans more. There's some that do it pretty well, some of the younger people in the House in particular. I think they got to keep doing it. I think it's effective. And I think you saw a lot of speakers do that during the convention. I thought AOC's was good when she was talking about the differences between the working class and the rich people, and how the Republicans are the party of the rich. So she's trying to do some branding there. I'll talk about that on my show too, probably. Raskin I liked how he praised Biden and what Biden accomplished. I love he threw in a line there about fighting the banana Republicans. I mean, I got a good laugh out of that one. Jasmine Crockett, ever since I've seen her come in, she's just a trolling expert, I think. And she was doing that all throughout her speech. And I think it showed how useless Trump is. And then towards the end, I liked how she brought up the story about how Kamala Harris helped her out when she first started in the House. So that was A speech I thought was pretty good. I also thought the 3 stories about reproductive rights were good. I mean, as I recall, that was the time where I think the convention hall was the quietest that I heard it. I mean, you could hardly hear. I mean, it was just really quiet in there at that when they were giving their stories, which is quite different than how it was usually in there. A lot of energy in there. I thought Hillary's speech was good, particularly when she said we need to keep working, we have Trump on the run, those kinds of things. And I loved how she talked about how the Democrats are being the party of freedom. I'm going to talk some more about that too on Matt's show, where the Democrats are really trying to take the brand of we are the party of freedom. The Republicans are not. They want to take away your freedom. So I thought she did a good job talking about that, those things. And then Biden's speech, I kind of talked about that already, but some of his quotes I wrote down were, I really love being, the president, but I love this country even more. That's what he said when he was talking about why he dropped out. America, I gave you my best to you. That was good. And, I liked how he reminded us what he accomplished. I mean, he accomplished a lot in mainly the first 2 years when the Democrats had the trifecta, the House, the Senate, and the presidency. I think that was the biggest part of his speech. But, let him have some time. It was like the older generation was kind of passing the torch to the younger generation. On day 2, the roll call of the states was kind of fun. They had music and all this stuff, and then when you compare that to the Republicans, I mean, there was a huge difference there. And then when Minnesota came up towards the end, Brett, did you see the roll call for Minnesota?
I unfortunately missed that part.
Okay, because I thought, I was just kind of glancing at my TV at that point, but I thought I saw John Randall there.
Oh, you are correct.
Talking.
Yeah, I know John Randall was there. Yes, I think he was the one that might have been leading it.
Yeah, I think so. And then Klobuchar and Tina Smith talked too. But I glanced over there. I looked at my wife and I said, I think that's John Randall, talking. So yeah. Which
I didn't know he was into politics prior to this convention at all. So that was kind of cool to see him out there.
Yeah, I didn't even know he was. I don't know. Does he still live in Minnesota? I
wasn't aware of that myself either.
Yeah. So. And then the Obamas killed it. I mean, they're both great speakers. One of my issues was, okay, who was better, Michelle or Barack? And a lot of people after Michelle gave her speech is like, and Barack even acknowledges, it's like, well, it's going to be a tough one to follow. But some of the the key takeaways from their speech, I think again was sort of the trolling that they did, where I love Michelle's line about, I guess Trump is trying to take a black job. So when she was referring to the president, so that was epic line, I thought there. And then Barack was talking about how with Trump's obsession with crowd size, and then he made his hands smaller. That was kind of funny. I think those will be playing over and over and over. And then both of them talked about, we need to do something. And so that we have overwhelming turnout, so there's no doubt of who won the election. Day 3, Keith Ellison spoke that day, and Dana Nessel. Those were the two who talked about Harris as when she was Attorney General of California. One of the Republicans who talked, Jeff Duncan. I loved his line that, you're a Republican, you can go ahead and vote for Harris. You're not going to, turn into a Democrat, but you are going to be a patriot. I thought that was a really good line. And then Hakeem Jeffries talking about how, we broke up with you, Donald. In the 2020 election, we don't want you around anymore. Go away. I thought that was pretty good. And then Bill Clinton's speech. I loved how he brought up And he claims that he triple checked this. Since 1989, 51 million jobs have been added to the economy. 50 million of those were under Democratic presidencies, while only 1 million were under Republicans. Now, what does that tell you about? For some reason, a lot of people think that the Republicans are better at running the economy. Well, I really love that line because that certainly shows, well, maybe not. And then, I did a show on that already. And then Oprah made I guess it was a surprise appearance. A lot of people like that one. But the highlight for me, I think, was the Walz' speech there at the end. Walz, 4 weeks ago, or maybe it's 5 weeks now. He was in the governor of Minnesota. The legislature's not in session. He's just doing his thing. And now he might end up being the vice president of the United States. That's quite a change in his life, quite a change in his family's life. I had no idea he could give a speech that well as he did that night. I think he really did well with that. I like how he points out what he actually did in Minnesota, what the Minnesota legislature accomplished. I think that really shows the progressive agenda, and I think a majority of people in this country are ready to go with these things. Whereas Republicans, they're gonna come out with all their negative stuff like they always do. But then I like how I think he's running. He's trying to portray himself as someone from Middle America to try and get those swing states wrapped up for us. And then at the end of the night, the Minnesota delegation, they just kept partying on. After Walz's speech was over, Melvin Carter was there, leading the chants. It was, it was pretty funny to watch. And then he did something similar at the end of the night too. So the last night, I didn't get to see too many of the speakers other than Kamala Harris, but the one that I did see was Elizabeth Warren. She got this long ovation even before she started talking. They introduced her and she came out there and the crowd just went nuts for her. She even started crying a little bit. I've been an Elizabeth Warren fan myself, so it was good. I think to give her some love from the crowd there. And I thought she gave a pretty good speech. And then, what can you say about Kamala's speech there at the end? She talked a lot about, fighting for the people, fighting for America's future. She talked a lot about freedom, right, and how Trump cozies up to dictators. One of her lines that I wrote down was, nobody has to fail for others to succeed. You're going to hear the Republicans talk about, all they talk about is failure and anger and fear and all that stuff. Basically saying, well, if you want to succeed, you have to make other people fail. And she basically argued, no, it doesn't have to be that way. And then her line about the Republicans being out of their minds. When she went through the abortion registry thing that I talked about last week on my show. That's in Project 2025. So I think that's going to get some play too. So all in all, I thought that again, this was a good convention. I hope that she gets a larger than normal push in the polling, now that it's post-convention. So we'll see how that goes. So you have been listening to Politics Matters with Bruce Klopfleisch, how civics, politics, and law affect you. We'll see you on the other side of the break for the final segment. Stay tuned.